And now, It's Just a Show is proud to present a very special with your hosts, Chris and Charlotte. Hello and welcome to a special bonus episode of It's Just a Show where we are looking at a few little documentaries, that they made back in the day to talk about what is this show, Mystery Science Theater 3000, and how does it even be born?
Yep. These documentaries helped us learn so much, everyone.
Now, I think this was your first time seeing them, right?
Oh, yeah, I hadn't seen these before. There are other documentaries about MST3K, ones that perhaps are a little bit more informing and have a few more interviews with actual cast members and stuff. But no, those I have seen. This I had never seen. Like, I had never known that Neil Patrick Harris, a.k.a. Doogie Howser, was a big fan of the show.
Well, and of course, there's another reason why you might suspect that Neil Patrick Harris is a fan of the show, but we'll get to that in a moment. So we watched This is MST3K, which was put out in the middle of season 4 in 1992, right before The Beatniks came out. And we also watched The Making of Mystery Science Theater 3000, which was a sci-fi era production that came out in the middle of season 8, right before Prince of Space in 1997.
Oh, see, that's better timing.
Well, that does make a lot of sense because it's the first season on the new network. They're halfway through it. They want to show off what they're doing. They want to explain it to people who are confused by it, maybe. I don't know. But it does make sense that they're celebrating this thing. With This is MST3K, I feel like, there's a bit of buzz happening around the show. And they're heading into a Turkey Day, and they also similarly just wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page about it, or just celebrate that they've got this show, which was a big hit for Comedy Central at the time.
Honestly, if I was Penn Jillette, I would have asked to do this show just so that I could heckle myself MST3K style. I feel like he paid to be in this episode and be like, all right, I want to heckle myself. How can I make that happen?
Okay, so yes, this is MST3K. Let's start with that one. It does indeed star Penn Jillette.
He hosts.
He hosts it. He was also, of course, the announcer for Comedy Central at the time, so he talks over the end credits of MST3K, even when there are still bits going on, which wasn't his fault.
No.
But, caused a lot of friction amongst the fans at the time.
Yes, I can imagine. I mean, when were they going to hear what was actually going on over the end credits? Because they're all taping it from the TV, and there was no other source to be able to watch these episodes, right, at the time?
Yeah, exactly. Oof. Yeah. So Penn Jillette is hosting it as sort of a pompous TV host who's explaining it in very, I guess, big words. They weren't that big, but it is very vapid.
They were very academic and
Not really. No,
but in the sense of I am putting on airs to talk about this thing, and very much projecting the image of a very important adult. Right. Talking about and I loved the set, right? With the background and the big posters of each of the members of the cast and a couple of scenes from the Satellite of Love. It was really well designed, the set that was it reminded me of a biography or, a lot of those other talking head shows that would have been on at the time where they're like, I want to tell you about this very important cultural phenomenon, give you some information. It was totally like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why it recurs the following year when they start making the Mystery Science Theater Hour, which is also ripping off biography.
That's when it actually gets hosted by Mike's character that everybody loves, right? Is that Jack?
Jack Perkins, yes.
Because as soon as Penn Jillette started talking and walking through, I was just like, isn't that supposed to be Jack Perkins? I thought this was him doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so this predates that.
This predates that, but both of them, I think, are ripping off the same sources.
Yeah.
So that's happening, and then Penn Jillette is also in the theater in Shadowrama talking back and making fun of the pompous version of himself on the screen, and then turning to camera and really giving you the lowdown from a street perspective about what MST3K is all about. Oh, boy.
Penn Jillette from the streets.
And that gets intercut with both talking heads, including people like Tom Shales, the Washington Post critic, who is one of the early MST3K boosters. And also, as you said, Neil Patrick Harris.
Because why not?
Fresh-faced.
Why not?
In his Doogie era.
Mm-hmm.
Were you a big Doogie Howser fan?
Oh my God, yes. I was totally a big Doogie Howser fan. Absolutely. I had the biggest crush on Neil Patrick Harris. I mean, who's more crushable than Will Wheaton and Neil Patrick Harris? This is pretty much my whole childhood.
Yep. I think you have a type.
I think I might. I don't know.
Or at least younger version of you did, for sure.
Well, that's true. It's true.
He showed up and it was just like, because, that was a long time ago and because I'm not a huge Doogie head.
What? What?
I watched a little bit of it back in the day, but I was never that into it. Although, I didn't dislike Neil Patrick Harris or anything, but he's like gone on to do so many other things now.
Oh, absolutely.
That I just looked at that and was like, he was so young.
He really was. Although he still has that little baby face going on now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's very lucky.
And it's good. It's good that he was so, able to explain his love for the show. He comes off very well in it, I thought.
Agreed. Absolutely. It was a very good use of Doogie Howser. So I'm totally all right with that. And as a Doogie Howser fan, if I had not been watching the Mystery Science Theater already, it would have convinced me to do so. I would have been like, ooh, Doogie Howser likes this show.
Doogie Howser and Tom Shales? I'm in.
I mean, no, that wouldn't have helped convince me, but that's all right.
And of course, Neil Patrick Harris would eventually appear on MST3K in season 11 when he shows up as a magician in Avalanche.
Thus bringing together all of the things that I love in one place. Will Wheaton, Doogie Howser, and MST3K? Come on.
Season 11 was specifically targeted at you.
I mean, I don't want to brag or anything, everybody, but woo!
Were there any other of the talking heads that weren't directly involved with the show that you were recognized or were excited to see? I don't know.
There wasn't somebody who I recognized, but they had one of the producers from Cheers.
Yes.
And so Cheers, long-running comedy show. Everybody thinks it's hilarious. And the producer of Cheers comes on this show and says, it's one of the first times I've laughed out loud in years. And if that's not one of the biggest critiques of Cheers I have ever heard, I don't know what is. That is such a weird thing for him to say as a producer of a different comedy show.
I mean, you're not supposed to laugh at your own jokes, but that still seems like it's going a bit far.
Yeah. I don't know. I laugh at my jokes all the time, so I just don't understand why that... Anyway, it was definitely weird. He said that and I was just like, wow, buddy, like, way to diss your own show.
It's true. Okay, here's a fun fact about this kind of documentary / sizzle reel / advertorial, whatever you want to call this thing, from 1992.
Infomercial,
sure. All of the talking heads were men.
Yep.
But at least when they turn to fans to talk about the show, they show a lot of women there.
Sometimes standing next to men who were talking and sometimes talking themselves, which is pretty nice.
It is. All the varieties of women were there.
All the varieties, except not a lot of cultural diversity.
No.
No,
that's true.
Oh, man.
But also, like, if you're filming MST3K fans where it was probably filmed in Minnesota, like, you're sort of selecting for white at this point.
You've already clicked that box pre-selecting.
Yeah. I'm sure if there had been any non-white people there, the producers would have grabbed them and said, we simply must have you on this documentary.
It's true. Why didn't they do fan interviews at the MST3 Con? They could have done another This is MST3K, but this time do the Gizmoplex version. That would have been so cool.
I mean, they could have, but they didn't.
They got to do another MST3 Con. on.
Yeah, well, they haven't announced it yet, but hopefully something will happen.
Fingers crossed.
When they're talking about the fans, one of the things that they mention is that almost all the fans, they say, obsessively tape the show.
Mm-hmm. One of the talking heads says that, right? I don't know a single fan who doesn't tape it multiple times and watches it over and over.
Well, I mean, guilty, right? Like, that's what I did.
I mean, they totally were kind of describing you. So.
And I'm not special in that way. I think it is actually pretty true that a lot of people started taping this show just so they could watch it again and again. And because, it's a show that rewards rewatching so that you can catch every last little bit.
And they had a fan who was talking about how they gather their fans together on Saturday afternoons and they all watch the show as it premieres together, which was really cool.
Yeah, it would have been nice if I'd had friends as a kid. But sure, rub that in.
So, Chris.
Especially friends who were fans of MST3K. That simply was not happening.
Oh, man.
But eventually, we lived together and I could make you watch it, so that was good.
It's true. You gathered together fans when you could.
And I had so many tapes at that point.
I know. We could just watch and watch and watch again. It was great. Did you, at the time, feel like the makers of MST3K were talking your language or inside your head or making the riffs that you would be making while you were watching? Because those were comments all of the fans were making during this documentary thing.
Yeah, there was a whole section about the variety of different riffs, and Tom Shells even refers to it as the residue of American popular culture, which is an interesting way of putting it, I suppose. And I really like that Frank talks about how not all the writers get all the jokes. That's a nice little moment, one of the few bits of insight we get into this.
Well, it's nice that he talks about everybody having their own center of expertise, and that they're bringing different perspectives to it. I mean, I think it's one of the things that the latest iterations of MST3K are trying to do even more, right? To bring in more ideas and more suggestions into that writer's room. So, but did you feel like you could have been in the writer's room? Like these were your jokes in your head that they were making?
Well, that's the thing that Neil Patrick Harris says, right? Like that they're saying what we're all thinking, so to speak. And occasionally that would happen, right? Occasionally I'd make the joke and they'd make the joke at the same time or something, or I'd be thinking it and they'd say the joke. But of course, most of the time they were talking about stuff that I didn't know anything about because I was just a dumb teenager who'd only experienced so many things, and they were old boomers, and so their sense of cultural references were far wider than mine were. So of course I couldn't have made most of those jokes. But that was also one of the things that I loved about the show. And they didn't mention that, the idea of like, oh, and when you're watching the show, you'll hear them talk about things. You'll be like, what the heck is that? And you'll want to find out more. That obviously, if you listen to this show, you know that that's one of the things that really compels me about MST3K.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, and it was interesting to me that because there was a fan who specifically said it's like they're in my head, right? Like Neil Patrick Harris does you'll be thinking the thing that they say, like, that really looks like William Shatner. And then they're like, William Shatner. Like, that's what Doogie says. But the fans that they're interviewing are also making comments like, they're speaking my language, or it's like they're in my head. So there's multiple people who are having that perspective as they're watching the show. And it's one of the things that they're highlighting inside of the short, that MST3K is so representative in some capacity of its fans, like it's reflecting its fans.
Another thing that comes up, which I think is more like what I was vibing off of when I watched it back in the day, and still now, is that this show is unlike anything else, right?
Yes.
This show is not similar to other shows. And there was something very compelling about, like, what even is this? Mm-hmm. I know what a sitcom is. I know what a sketch comedy show is. I know what a late night talk show is. I know what this, that, and the other thing are. What is MST3K? And obviously this is MST3K.
Yes. And what a good job for the documentary to explain it so fully. I found it kind of weird because they're talking about how there's nothing else like this on television, but then they're also saying this is a thing that everyone does in their living room. This is a thing that everyone does in the movie theaters. And this is not a thing that it ever occurred to me to do in a theater, right? To talk back to the screen while the movie was going seemed rude when I was a kid. I mean, it was really breaking a boundary for me when MST3K did it.
I think you're right. I think that there's something to that where they say that everybody does this, but not everybody does this. Not everybody responds as quickly and critically to the things that they are seeing as the makers of MST3K do, and as a certain set of the fans do. But I think for those who do that MST3K is going to be particularly compelling. So, like, I totally believe that Penn Jillette was talking back to movies before MST3K was a thing.
Oh, absolutely.
He's 100% that kind of guy.
Maybe Penn Jillette was, but this was breaking a huge cultural norm for me. Like, I would not have done this.
Yeah, exactly. So there's an interesting kind of tension there, but it's interesting to think about what that everyone does this is doing, right? Because it's like, me and my friends all do this, and me and my friends are all interested in this show, and you who are watching this are probably part of that group. So, like, it normalizes it, but it also presents it as a even more normal thing that, like, everybody in the world does this, which obviously they don't. Just like most people don't like MST3K.
Yes, but who are I don't want to know who those people are.
They're people who think it's incredibly rude to talk back to TV and movies, and if they encounter it, they're not convinced of its inherent wonderfulness. I don't know.
Okay. They sort of have a point. It's really hard to follow sometimes what's happening in the movie when everybody's riffing over it. You've talked about it. I've talked about it. But these movies are something that we've all already acknowledged or accepted are bad movies, and they need help, right? In order to be fun and accessible. I mean, that's part of what the show is putting forth, that there is in fact bad media out there, and that we're here to help you enjoy it and find it funny, rather than just deplorable.
Yeah. At the very beginning, Penn really highlights how bad these films are. Like, that's the framing device that he's using. These are bad films, and we're all going to talk back to them, but, like, they deserve it in that sense, which I feel like is an oversimplification of what's going on, but, you know, fair enough.
Sure. Well, fortunately, the documentary brings it up and is just like, yeah, they're bad, but they have to be bad in the right way. Mike says, he says there has to be some quality, there's some intention of quality from the filmmakers, that's what makes it easy to riff. And Trace talks about if there's a rubber suit, if there's a really stupid looking spaceship, you know, like those sorts of things, make it easy to riff and fun to riff for MST3K. So they do at least go into some, it's not every bad movie that can fit inside of this.
Yeah, they like it when it gets preachy.
Yes.
If somebody gets preachy in a film, it's going to make for good riffing, which I think is very true.
They tampered in God's domain.
He learned only too late that man is a feeling creature. And he also points out that the ones that they find the most painful to watch, or to rewatch, to watch again and again in order to make the show, those seem to be the most popular with the fans, which it does seem to often be true. Mm-hmm. Who knows?
Not always, though.
Let's see, what else? They also talk a bit about how it's nice to be in Minnesota, how that's a different space from LA or New York, and how that gives them a kind of independence and freedom, which I think is true, and also an interesting talking point to bring up in this kind of thing.
It totally is. It seems to be brought up by the people who live in the city as well, who are just like, oh, you couldn't do that sort of thing here. You really have to be in some podunk area to be able to make a show like this. It's like, wow, judgy much? But I think one of the, maybe it's not highlighted as much in This Is MST3K as much as in the other one, but there's very much a home. Oh, Neil Patrick Harris does bring it up. He talks about how this isn't made in a studio. You have the feeling that it's made in a garage, that it's made by real people. And I think they really are trying to pull that out of this documentary. This is real people making these things, and they're on a shoestring budget, and, you know, they're having a good time. time. And that's part of what the appeal of the show is, because they're like us.
Yeah, they're middle Americans. Oh, boy.
Yeah. Which was not true for either you or I. But, we were on totally separate coasts, so we average to a middle American.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's how that worked.
I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
It's a show that doesn't get studio noted all over the place, right? It doesn't feel like it's been artificially created. It does feel off the cuff and real. And that's part of, I think, what fans are reacting to.
Yeah, well, and then we get a whole segment about how it's made and a quick little peek into the writing room and the idea that, is this ad-libbed or not? This is the big question. And no, of course it isn't ad-libbed. As Joel points out from his experience during the KTMA era, if you ad-lib, it's a traffic jam. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As Josh used to always trample on his lines. And there's that one episode where Joel basically has to say, "Stop! You need to let me tell a joke."
Boo.
During the episode, it's amazing. I mean, he says it very quietly, but yeah. They spend 2 days watching the movie again and again and writing jokes, and you get a little tiny shot of the writers' room. It's not quite the behind the scenes detail that we were promised, but there we go. That's what happens.
We get much more of that in the sci-fi era one. But I do appreciate that Frank is we've done our job if one person gets the most obscure joke in the show. And it's Chris, it's like they were setting up this podcast.
It's like they were, yeah. And they also indicate that, one of the great things about the show, in addition to it being independent, is that it really shows that audiences aren't as dumb as people in showbiz sometimes think, because you can make these obscure jokes and you don't need to hold them by the hand. So, that's a lovely bit of fluffing up the fans.
It's true. Well, and they're highlighting or many of the people that they're interviewing are highlighting that there is an enormous range of riffs. So, yes. You can have something that's very accessible to everyone, but then you also have these very obscure things, or hey, you're a sports guy. We make sports jokes, which means that there's something for everyone.
So all that is intercut with a bunch of little clips from the show. Mm-hmm. This is MST3K. Did that convince you to watch the show? Was that a successful advertorial?
I mean, it's kind of amazing, Chris, but as I was watching it, I was just oh, and there's the Colossal Man, and there's the Space Ranger, Rocky Space Ranger, and I was just we've all just done these episodes. So it convinced me that I had already watched the show, actually. And that they're funny. I didn't even think that they chose the funniest bits from those episodes, which was also it's even better than they're saying it is.
Yes, I agree with that. I felt maybe it's just because they're little clips and so you don't get the full context, but I felt like the clips were pretty ineffective, or at least not as effective as I knew the show could be.
Yeah, agreed.
So it didn't feel like it was showing off the show in its finest hour, but I remember when this premiered and I thought, this is very exciting because
more people will find it.
Yeah, it just felt like it was special. Not every show gets its little behind the scenes documentary, at least they didn't back in the early 90s. So it was this is a real thing now. Not only has it been around for a few seasons, not only does it have a back catalog, but now it's also got a little fluffy documentary about it to try to win people over. And it's yay, my team is winning is how I felt.
Or at least my team has support. I mean, sometimes that's what you want to see. The network's not going to cancel a show that it just did a documentary about.
True. So a few years later, 1997, we get a new channel for the show, of course. And on the Sci-Fi Channel, they want to show off this property. And so halfway through season 8, they put out The Making of Mystery Science Theater 3000, a fairly similar fluff piece about the show.
Yeah, we do get some more behind the scenes and how do things work this time around. And we get less interviews with very important adults who are going to tell us about this very important show.
Yes, no, there aren't the talking heads. There are a lot more behind the scenes. There are a lot more interviews with people who make the show other than the people who are on camera. So that's very nice.
It really is, actually.
Though the show, it starts out with some clips, and the first clips, they're from Riding with Death, and it's a booger joke and a fart joke.
Yeah, well, I mean, Mike does talk about how toilet jokes are what the fans want, and it's mostly toilet humor here on this show.
It just, like, I'm not even opposed to those jokes. Like, I think I enjoyed them when we watched Riding with Death, but, like, it sets a tone real quick for what's happening with MST3K now.
It's true. Well, and I also appreciated just that right from the beginning, they are riffing their own special. So they're riffing themselves, riffing things. It's getting very meta, Chris.
Yes, this time around, instead of Penn Jillette, we've got Mike and the bots in the theater looking at the opening credits and other aspects of the show that are going on. And yes, they are riffing themselves. They're riffing their own behind the scenes, which, there's some good jokes, especially towards the end. I found some of the jokes about, it's just like the thing I enjoy about the Muppets whenever the Muppets acknowledge that there might be someone down there, which they very rarely do. But every once in a while, especially on like blooper reels, you'll see them like, oh my God, somebody's got their hand up me. Oh no, who are you? What are you doing? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm basic, but I love that sort of thing.
Oh no, it's great.
So once again, we're going to go through the whole process of how we make the show about what good movies are. This time, Kevin points out that you know what a good movie for the show is? It's a bad movie that has good sound.
Given the movies they've had that have bad sound, he's not wrong.
He is so not wrong.
But that's not the only thing. That's not the only thing they're looking for. It's true, we don't get Trace in this one saying, yeah, a really ugly spaceship. That's what we want. Men in rubber suits. Give me a rubber suit. Love it. But they do talk about, again, needing to have the right kind of bad movie to be involved in this. This time they don't talk about it being idealistic or preachy. They just refer to it as like the best of the worst type of thing.
Yeah. We get a potted history of the show, which is fine. It's very quick. And then we spend quite a lot of time, much more time, I feel like, than we did on the history of the show, talking about how big Mike's face is.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh. Yes. That's what Kevin says is Mike just has a big face. Oh, it's a big, meaty face. Like, let's have a long, lingering camera pan about Mike's meaty face.
It takes up a phenomenal amount of time, but that's fine.
But apparently that's what he brings to the show, so they really have to highlight it. His big, meaty face and his fart jokes.
Exactly. Then we get Kevin talking about wasting your education on pop culture, as he puts it, which... Okay.
Sure.
And then we talk to Bill, and it's all about how he has had to learn how to be a puppeteer, which I don't know if that's like trying to paper over the fact that the first couple episodes of season 8 of the Sci-Fi Era, Bill is not a very good puppeteer, and it's very obvious that he's still learning. Like, he's fine by this point in season 8, so they're right to note that. But I don't know whether it was, hey, if you only watch the first couple episodes,
we're better now.
Yeah, maybe watch again. I don't know. Mm. And then we talk about Mary Jo as it's nice to have a female character.
Mm-hmm. A strong female character. Stop it. They talk about her being a strong character, and they also say that she plays Psycho real well.
Yep, that is what they mean by a strong character, it seems. Which, I mean, she does. But...
No question. Actually, I enjoy her as a character on this.
Of course. And then they really push the traveling and meeting new characters angle of the plotline of season 8.
Yeah, this is the fun part of the show, everybody. We get to travel and meet new characters, and I mean, it is true that their behind the scenes set makers and their prop makers get to make super cool things all the time, but they always get to make super cool things. Like, oh my gosh, they got to make super cool things when they were on Comedy Central too.
Yeah, the ongoing plot and why it's so important and necessary and how it's central to the show's purpose and vision is so aggressively underlined in this middle of season 8 special that it's just like, yeah, they're going to try to make one last stand to make this stick with the fans. I don't know. I don't remember how the fans, if they like hated the idea of an ongoing plot arc, or if they just didn't. They're like, fine, it's fine. I don't care. I'm here for the movies and hanging out with my friends. Like, I don't, whatever you're going to do is fine. I don't remember because I'd stopped paying attention to the online discourse around then. But
yeah. And the ongoing, like, overarching plot line that was happening in the segments in between the movie. I know it's not one of the things that you enjoyed most about this, but it was the biggest change with the move to the Sci-Fi Network. So it does seem like that's the thing they want to highlight as a positive.
Yeah. Well, it was their idea. Of course, this isn't something that Best Brains made, right? Like, neither of these documentaries were made by the MST3K people, though they helped in various ways.
It seems like in this one, at least, they're far more involved with providing things for it.
Yes.
And
yes.
that's at least encouraging. I think it's why we get more of a what's happening behind the scenes and who are we to each other and what are the things that we appreciate about each other. Like, we get a lot more of that in this, right? We see them more as how do we feel about each other as the team that makes this?
Sure. But my point is that the big narrative that this special is saying about what is MST3K is the Sci-Fi Channel's narrative. It isn't Mike and Friends narrative, right?
Yeah, it's true.
That's interesting. It's interesting that, like, because the Sci-Fi Channel is making this, of course they're going to push the narrative angle because that's their idea.
It's true. And they're also propping Mike up a lot inside of this special, right? Talking about, it's really hard for him to have become the new host. And, like, true, it would be really hard to be a new host.
It was. That all happened.
Yeah, and so, like, yes, absolutely, that was really hard. But they're, talking about his big meaty face, and they're talking about his funny jokes and how everybody loves his toilet humor. And they're talking about how, we made this character and he just destroys planets. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. And they talk about Bobo. And how much Kevin loves being Bobo.
Yeah, because he gets to be an alter ego. He gets to take on a persona for a while.
Tom is a persona.
Yeah, but, if you're embodying it fully, I guess that's different.
That's true.
It makes sense. Like, I totally understand that. That flies.
It was cool to see the makeup scene.
That was cool. And it was cool that we got a lot more behind the scenes in this one.
Yes.
So we get the entire writer's room. We get some loving shots of the writer's room, which has a pinball machine.
Yes! And lots of couches standing around the smallest TV. Chris, I didn't remember TVs were that small.
They were. That was the biggest TV money could buy in Minnesota in 1997.
We've seen the Comedy Central TV. We've seen the TV that Comedy Central gave a fan. We know there's bigger TVs. They just won't fit in that room.
That's true. Unfortunately, they didn't win that contest.
No, it's really rough.
They also have, and you love to see it, some of the most 90s computers you could imagine.
Oh, it's true. And they're bad typers, just like I am.
Absolutely. They talk about how the writers will take turns writing what everybody else is saying rather than making jokes. They're just trying to transcribe everything. And it's clear that some of the writers do a better job of typing and spelling than others. And you even get Mike looking at a few music-related jokes and saying, this person clearly didn't know what I was talking about when I made this joke. The musical terms that they've written down are not what anyone would have said, but we can figure out what it was. We can figure it out. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, and this is speaking to what Frank said inside of the other special, right? Like, not everybody inside of the room is getting every single joke that everybody else is making. But that doesn't mean that joke isn't going to make it into the final draft or the final script, because they take the time to explain the jokes to each other and decide what to keep and what not to keep.
We also get to see inside of the movie theater studio part.
Which was so cool.
Which for some reason, they didn't do in the first one, which would have been really nice and fun. But we get to see it this time, so that's okay.
It was very cool. They had a person who does effects who was coming in and just like, it's amazing what these guys do. Like, they have this teeny budget and they do these, like, poo-pooed effects, right? Like effects that nobody else would do now because they're so basic. And it's like, but they're so effective. Like, look, like it's just, the theater seats are just a big piece of styrofoam. I mean, like, what?
So yeah, the theater seats are just styrofoam. There's some chairs that everybody sits in front of them. And then they have a white wall where the movie's going to be, and they chroma key it out. It's the simplest tech in the world to do, but it's really effective. And the guy that you're mentioning is Jeff Stonehouse, who was the director of photography for the sci-fi era of the show. And it does seem like he was completely surprised when he learned how they did it, which he might have done because he was part of the Minnesota team behind This Is MST3K before he got hired by MST3K.
What?
So yeah, Jeff Stonehouse, he had worked on a segment about MST3K for Entertainment Tonight, of all people. And I guess met Jim Mallon in the process of that. And they shared business cards or something, came back to do the camera work for This Is MST3K.
No way.
And then did a few other little things for Best Brains before being brought on full-time as lighting technician and then director of photography. And so, you know, he did it. He worked his way into the cool show that he found so fascinating when he learned how it was made.
You know, I'm glad they made that other special then. Who knew?
So when you watched this, did you have a sense of how they filmed those segments, or was this all new to you, or?
This was all new to me, but I also I don't have enough experience with creating things on film to have thought about how they might have done it. Like, it's just not something that's inside of my wheelhouse. So I hadn't even sat down and been like, well, if I was going to produce a thing such as this, like, how would I go about it? Like, nope, hadn't even thought about it at all. And so it was really wonderful, actually, to see how they were doing all the small things that they do to make the show work.
Did you ever think that the bots in the theater were spray painted black?
I hadn't even ever thought about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why would they need to be spray painted black? It's just their silhouettes.
I think it helps them be more silhouette-y.
I'm sure that it does, right?
I mean, there's a few early episodes where they don't spray paint Tom's bowl.
Oh, and you can see through it.
So you can kind of see through it, and it's really weird and bad. And it's good that they stopped doing that.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
That's a lot of fun. Then we get a segment about the sketches, which, according to the narrator, drive the show's storylines.
Well, that's true. It does.
Apparently, it does nowadays, yes. I mean, I guess it always did, but it didn't really have storylines before it came to sci-fi, and it didn't have storylines really much after season 8, kind of. So, sure, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, they still shout out the fan base, and they talk about all the people who write in anytime something changes to check in with them. And they talk about how supportive everybody who watches the show is. They don't really mention the fans in connection with the segments. And maybe it's just because, you know, MST3K was just so new on the sci-fi era that they didn't. I don't know. They didn't have a sense for how the fans were reacting. But they do talk about the fans and how important the fans are and how supported they feel by fans. So, yay.
Yeah. And we also get to hang out a little bit with Patrick Bransing and Bees McKeever, which is always a delight.
Absolutely. I adore them talking about how, I mean, Kevin's the one who talks about, oh, if you look at the set, like, these are all things that came from thrift stores and stuff. And then Bees was like, I just go to my mom's house. And I'm like, hey, you don't mind if I take this, do you? Like, her mom's house is this great source of props for the show. It's fabulous.
Yeah. This was some of the most fun parts of this little short documentary type thing.
Yeah, we all get to spend time with the people who are in front of the camera because they're the people we see when we watch the show. And, you know, granted, they're personas. They're not the actual people. So it's also nice to see them behind the scenes talking like they are as real people rather than their characters. But it's fabulous to be able to spend some time with the people who are behind the scenes making the things that you see. So it was a delight to be able to see all of them.
Yeah. And then we wrap up by asking, how long are they going to make it? And everybody's like, well, there's so many movies. And Mike gets excited about how every season they get a little bit better because they get a new
thing.
A new thing. They talked about how Jeff Stonehouse has a jib now, so the camera can do interesting swoopy in motions and so forth. And he's excited about the day when computer animated dinosaurs will cost $20 each.
Because then he can do My Dinner with Andre with dinosaurs. I think that's what we're all looking forward to in the world.
I mean, they don't cost much more than $20 now. So.
But Mike's not on the show anymore.
No, there you go. So.
I appreciate that Kevin was like, as long as it's interesting and as long as it's funny, it has a place.
Yeah. And, even though Sci-Fi disagreed and canceled the show shortly afterwards, or 2 years afterwards, let's say, they have obviously continued making riff tracks and are still doing it. And, happy ending, I guess. I mean, just because Sci-Fi wasn't willing to support them monetarily anymore doesn't mean that there wasn't a fan base out there that was still willing to support them. There was. And so there were other avenues that they could go and still be able to do the work that MST3K was doing. So, which of these two infomercials did you enjoy more? Wow, which one did I enjoy more? I mean, it's hard for me to vote against Doogie Howser, but I'm probably going to say that the Sci-Fi one was the more enjoyable of them because you really got to see more of the people who make the show and more of how it's done and what it means to them and how they work together. And I thought that was just kind of the best advertising you can do for the show. I mean, it's a bunch of people who respect and really like each other, who enjoy working together, who have fun making the show, and they live to make each other laugh. That's awesome. So I'd go with the Sci-Fi one. How about you? I agree with all that. The Sci-Fi era one is a lot more friendly behind the scenes. We're having fun making a show together, and it's, not flashy, but we like it. I love all that stuff, and I love a little bit more of the actual behind-the-scenes stuff, which we didn't get in This is MST3K. I found that the editing in the making of Mystery Science Theater 3000 was incredibly aggressive. It was very tight edits and very tight cuts, like it was some sort of TikTok thing. I don't know, but not effective in the way that those tight cuts can be in a TikTok thing, right? Mm-hmm. So that combined with which riffs they picked out when they were highlighting the riffs in the Sci-Fi era one, which were often, again, they started with fart jokes. They were like, and we make Shakespeare references, and then they do the most bone obvious Shakespeare reference. Well, they did say that Mike was the one who makes the Shakespeare references, so. Yeah, well, yeah, I suppose so. But they weren't showcasing a particularly obscure or like involved or like, oh, you'll get this if you know Shakespeare. They were like, Much Ado About Nothing. Shakespeare? I don't know. So like in terms of the qualities of the riffs that are quoted, I think the first one might have won me over more. But as somebody who was already a fan of the show watching it, which was true for me for both of them, obviously, I think the second one does give me a bit more information, which is what I'm here for now. So yeah, there you go. That's true. It is nice to have more interactions with fans and seeing people who love the show talk about the show. And that definitely is a advantage to the first one, right? If you wanted some sort of affirmation that you were not the only one watching this show, and that it wasn't obscure and that it existed inside of some larger cultural consciousness, the first one is going to give you more of that. I mean, Doogie Howser watches it. Well, do you think people should try to hunt down copies of these, maybe on YouTube or something, and watch them today in 2024 as we record this? Is it still worth it to watch these? I mean, it's a nice historical point of reference, and you do get to see the people who make it. I mean, they're only 20 minutes, huh? They're only 20 minutes. It's not that bad, but I don't think it added very much to my understanding. I feel like you've taught me more about what happened behind the scenes in this show. I don't know if anybody who's listening to this knows, but It's Just a Show is this really great podcast about MST3K. I feel like I've learned more from listening to this podcast about how the show was made and just the personalities behind it than I did from these infomercial type things. So I don't know, take that for what it's worth. How would you recommend them? I mean, all right, if you don't have we're 150 hours, give or take, to listen to just the non-bonus episodes of this show. then you only have 22 minutes and you want to try to figure this out, then watching either of these would probably be a fine use of your time. Yes, it's a good start. It's a good start. I don't know. They're fun enough. I didn't mind revisiting them. They're very inessential, but there you go.
Now, they must have a piece of nostalgia for you, though.
Well, this is MST3K certainly does. I didn't see the Sci-Fi Era one until, much later because I had stopped watching the show at that point. But this is MST3K definitely was very exciting for me when I saw it, when it premiered, and I'm sure I watched it several times because I had obsessively videotaped it because that's what us MST3K fans do.
Yes. Or that one guy who's the MST3000 fan.
Yes.
That was weird.
Also,
it was totally weird.
It still isn't fully settled. I mean, this is MST3K for whatever reason. They keep putting a space between the MST and the 3K, which is just weird. Just weird. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is MST3K and the making of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Someday, someone is going to make a little documentary about the making of It's Just a Show, but not today.
Not today, friends.
But if it's tomorrow, get in touch. info@itsjustashow.com. You know how to do the thing. All right. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
We're having fun making a show together, and it's, not flashy, but we like it.